The movie begins in 1914 when a boat is seen in the middle of the ocean that had started its journey 67 days ago. A man from England had set sail with a crew and was leaning on the guardrail when the captain passed him a telescope and told him that his island was up ahead. When they arrive, the captain has his men carry the passenger's suitcase and they head toward a cabin by the rocky bench. They get there and they find the place ransacked, and it seems as though nobody has been there for a long time. Although the captain wanted to hold off on bringing the rest of the provisions before knowing the place was safe, the passenger insists everything to be set up. After giving his orders, the passenger turns to the window and sees a lighthouse at a distance. Leaving the cabin, the passenger and the captain head toward the lighthouse and are surprised to find it looking like a fortress. Although they knock at the door and yell several times to see if there's somebody there, they don't really get an answer, so they push in the locked door and invite themselves inside. Going up the stairs, they find a disheveled-looking man sleeping on the bed in the corner. Waking him up, the captain tells the man that they must have come to replace the previous weather official and asks him about his whereabouts. The exhausted man takes his time answering as he is still trying to adjust to waking up and the strangers in his home. Waking up completely naked toward the balcony, he tells the men that the previous weather official had gone out one day and never returned. The very careless man introduces himself as Gruner, who the captain seems to find continuously suspicious. Despite the captain's insistence, the passenger decides to stay on the island, refusing to take the gun that he had been offered. Saying his farewell, the captain takes his men and leaves the island, and as he watches the ship set sail, he remembers that he had to live in solitude for 12 months and feels a sense of comfort.
Wait, hold on. Did you subscribe to our channel? Come on guys, you're here, you're watching the video. Help us out by hitting the subscribe button, as it really helps out me and my team to make more videos for you guys. And now, let's get back to the recap.
Returning to the cabin, the passenger begins to unpack and fix his new home in a way that would suit him. After he was done, he sits on a working desk in the corner of the room and goes through the cabinets, finding the old officer's journal. Inside, he finds drawings and descriptions of animals and plants that the man had found during his stay. Fascinated, the passenger goes through every page, surprised to see strange drawings in the mix. The following morning, the passenger leaves the cabin and heads down to the rocky shore with his equipment. Using his telescope, the passenger uses it to see toward the lighthouse and watches Gruner do his usual routine of walking around naked on the balcony. While he watches, he thinks he saw something in the space atop the lighthouse, but when he retakes a look, it was gone. After spending the day observing the passenger, he returns to his cabin to enjoy a quiet night. While working on his desk, he begins to hear sounds coming from outside as someone tries to open his door. At first, the passenger thinks Gruner was playing some kind of joke on him, but soon realizes that he's wrong when a grayish-webbed hand slips its way under his door. Kicking it aggressively, the passenger manages to make the unidentified creature pull its hand back, but is unable to chase it away. When he keeps hearing the door being banged, he hides in a small cabin under the floor and attempts to see what's out there through the small crack. Suddenly, an eye appears, watching him just as he was. Out of reflex, the passenger stabs the creature in the eye and sits quietly while the noise outside dies down. The following morning, the passenger slowly opens the cabin and looks around. When he was sure that the coast is clear, he leaves the hiding spot and heads over to the lighthouse. Although he knocks and yells for Gruner to let him in, the shabby man comes onto the balcony and tells him that he should have stayed on the ship before walking back in. Realizing that he wasn't gonna get any help from Gruner, the passenger returns to his cabin and tries to fortify it in preparation for the night. As the sun goes down, the passenger got his gun ready and waited by the window to see what he was up against. While he watches, he notices dozens of creatures crawling out of the water and heading toward him. As the creatures try to fight their way in, the passenger uses his gun to keep them at bay, but they were too many to shoot before his ammunition runs out. Having no other choice, he lights a fire around his house, which successfully chases away the creatures. Although they seem to have gone back to the ocean, the fire, pushed by the active wind, starts igniting the cabin. With a blanket around his body, he barges through the door and runs away from the site, hiding behind one of the large rocks. A few minutes later, heavy rain starts to pour, which douses the fire. The following morning, the passenger returns to his cabin cabin and finds that he cannot hide out there anymore because most of it has burned down. With his gun in hand, he heads out of the cabin, keeping an eye out for Gruner, who had just left the lighthouse. Hiding out in a nearby cave, he waits for the bucket that he had set up to fill with water. He's suddenly attacked by a blue humanoid creature like the ones who had attacked him the night before. Pushing it back, the passenger gets ready to shoot, but is stopped by Gruner, who also has a gun, and tells him to cease fire. After getting Gruner to lower his gun, he gets him to shelter him in exchange for tobacco and coffee, and Gruner calms the passenger down by telling him that the creature is harmless, calling it over and petting it like a dog. Once he sees that he's calmed him down, Gruner tells the passenger that he will be calling him Friend from now. As they were transporting all the provisions in his cabin, Friend realizes that the previous officer didn't just disappear, but he had died after being stranded by Gruner. After returning to the lighthouse, Friend passes out and sleeps for 2 days. When he wakes up, he finds the creature licking his burnt hand and realizes the pain had gone away. Changing his clothes, Friend goes up the stairs and finds Gruner counting their ammunition. He notices how the creature follows Gruner's every order like a well-trained pet. Friend begins to pay attention to the creature, fascinated by a species that he'd never seen before. He was also curious as to why Gruner hadn't escaped on the ship that originally brought him there, but the grumpy man explains that although life might be difficult, he was the master of his destiny there. One night, after Friend had settled down into his new life in the lighthouse, Gruner calls him up to the balcony to help him ward off the impending attack. Lighting the place up, the two men get ready, and Friend notices Gruner's female creature making some kind of noise that sounds like a continuous hum. A few minutes later, their surrounding is run over by aquatic creatures, and as Gruner shoots and fights with all his might, Friend is overwhelmed by his fear and passes out. The following day, Gruner wakes Friend up by splashing water on his face and yells at him for being weak, telling him that he needs to pull his own weight. Later, when Friend returns from fetching water, he finds Gruner being intimate with his aquatic creature. That night, Gruner tells Friend that he's giving him one more chance and takes him out to the balcony. As the creature approaches, he tells Friend to shoot while he retreats inside and closes a steel door on him. Leaning back on the wall, Gruner hears the gunshot fired by Friend until it finally grows quiet and he falls asleep. The following morning, Gruner opens the door and finds Friend covered in blood but still alive. After the awful incident, Gruner and Friend settle into a curious coexistence where they tolerate each other during the day and protect one another during the night. Weeks pass as they coexist until one morning when Friend suggests that perhaps it's the wailing of the creature that keeps attracting the beasts. Curious as to why she would call her own kin to die, Gruner was dismissive about the idea, telling Friend that he should only be worried about his survival. Friend falls into a sense of comfort as it had been weeks since the last attack, letting him ponder his existence and the strange things that go on the island. He finds it strange that Gruner would be intimate with the same creatures that he had been working so hard to exterminate. Friend continues to study Gruner's creature, who had taken a liking to him, and he decides to give her a name and calls her Aneris. One night, after being distracted by weeks of silence and a game of chess, Gruner realizes that they've forgotten to turn on the light. After attempting to fight them and realizing that there were too many of them to take out, the two hide in one of the lighthouse's chambers until dawn when the creatures return to the water. When Aneris licks Gruner's battle scars, Friend tells him that they wouldn't be able to survive another assault like the one they faced and that they're running out of supplies, explaining that they need to find a way off the island. One morning, Friend notices a ship passing close by the island and tries to signal it with a flare gun, but is stopped by Gruner, who holds him down on the ground. When noticing the attack, Aneris becomes aggressive toward her master to save Friend and almost gets beaten by Gruner. As she runs away, Friend angrily tells Gruner that he's a scared and pathetic man, and later, Friend finds Aneris on the beach after Gruner had beaten her violently and tries to make her feel better by giving her a small boat that he had carved out. Realizing what she was seeing, she leads him to a sailboat that had been washed up ashore. Although he tries to tell Gruner the good news, the old man refuses to entertain the idea that Friend had about diving into the deep and retrieving the dynamite that had been left by a shipwreck. A few days later, Gruner follows Friend down to the shores and spies on Friend and Aneris swimming in a pool together and changes his mind. The two head out to where the shipwreck happened and with Friend's courage manage tries to retrieve the dynamite. That night, the two men set up the explosives all around the lighthouse and await the next attack. Gruner devises a plan to lure many of the creatures to the lighthouse to exterminate as many of them as possible. Although Gruner's plan succeeds, they're pushed back by the force of the blast and pass out. The following morning, Gruner goes out and finishes off the remaining of the creatures with a harpoon. While looking at the carnage that they had caused, Friend notices a necklace on the creatures, which strengthens his idea that they weren't simple savages and feels regret. That night, Friend hears many of the creatures wailing and realizes that they're mourning their dead. The next morning, Friend places the wooden carving of a boat far from the lighthouse as a form of peace offering. A few days later, while Gruner was passed out drunk, Friend finds pictures that the old man was hiding and realizes that he was the weather officer before he was. He then goes outside to check on the little boat and finds a youngling of one of the creatures playing with it. Behind the boy, he sees Aneris, who had been gone for a few days, standing confidently upright with her people following her. Seeing them gathered together, Friend realizes that they were trying to form a truce. Suddenly, Gruner appears from the lighthouse with a gun and begins to threaten the creatures. Friend tries to explain to the elderly man that they were peaceful, but Gruner begins to order Aneris to go inside and she refuses. Upset by the incident, Gruner returns to the lighthouse and begins to shoot flare guns which kill the youngling who had approached Friend. Rushing back to the lighthouse, Friend fights the elderly man but finally convinces him that what they were doing was a mistake. Filled with regret, Gruner walks out and lets the creatures kill him, and months later, the ship carrying Friend's replacement arrives and assumes he is Gruner when they find him sleeping in the lighthouse, but he doesn't correct them. When they ask what happened to the weather official, he tells them that he died from typhus, and looking at him, the officers decide that he's unfit to be the lighthouse keeper and decide to take him back with them. Aneris watches the arrival of the new ship from a distance, and realizing that Friend is going to be departing soon, she turns around and enters the ocean, swimming away to freedom. I hope you guys enjoyed the recap. Make sure to leave me a like, leave a comment, also subscribe to my channel. I love you guys so much and I promise to see you on my next recap. Bye!